Jane Velez-Mitchell with JaneUnChained. Welcome to our weekly Boycott Meat Roundtable. Today, we are very honored to have an attorney from Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, which, as you can see from this headline, has just sued the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, for ignoring concerns about potential presence of SARS-CoV-2, which I understand to mean the coronavirus, the COVID, on meat and poultry products. Mark, take it away. That's a very, very, well, it sounds like a very urgent headline.
It is. This lawsuit just went into the court system last week, and it is based on a petition we filed in May when things were really looking bad in the meat and poultry processing plants. At the time, there were maybe 14,500 workers or inspectors who had gotten COVID, or and many had died. And so we filed this petition at the time, and we asked USDA to do 5 things. And the first was implement a system in which all these facilities would test their meat and their poultry products for the presence of the virus. And in addition to that, we wanted to see more reporting. We wanted USDA to have the facilities report both to state health officials and also to the USDA the amount of workers and inspectors and their family members who were sick or who had died. And this information should be public because these people are handling food. And then in addition to that, we had asked for USDA to, for the time being, while this is such a big pandemic, have warnings placed on all the labels for meat and poultry, just to say, you know, in the absence of testing, we cannot certify that this is COVID-free, and you need to know about this risk in buying this product, and also to have similar information posted in retail settings. And of course, we got an expedited review of the petition, which was nice, but USDA said no thanks. They rejected the whole thing. And so yes, last week we sued, and we're pushing back, and we're saying that under the Administrative Procedure Act, the denial of this petition is absolutely unreasonable when you're looking at 5 million cases of the coronavirus nationwide, and thousands of people dying, and then the same thing happening at a smaller level in meat and poultry and even in fish processing plants, all of which are regulated by the USDA. So we've pushed back, and we're saying to the court, please order the USDA to put these warnings on the product labels, and also to require facilities to actually test for the coronavirus.
Now, let me ask you this question. It seems like there's a very big concern about testing. In other words, if everybody was so sure that there was no meat being contaminated with COVID-19, you'd say, go ahead and test it. I have nothing to hide. Are you concerned that the refusal to do these tests might signal that there is some concern that there is COVID contamination on meat, given that something like, 40,000 meat workers have come down with COVID-19 and almost 100 have died?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not only that, it's at 474 plants across the country. So everybody is in these, they're taking home this disease to their communities, and they're bringing it into the factories, or I'm sorry, the facilities, whatever it is. And yes, the point you made is absolutely correct, because what we saw in the letter from the USDA denying our petition was that it said there was no evidence of transfer from humans to the food products, the workers to the food. But yes, of course that's true. That's because there's no testing. And it was just a really circular argument. We're not going to order testing because there is no evidence, but there is no evidence because there has been no testing. But what we do know outside of the USDA, in China, for instance, we have seen the Chinese government banning imports of different meat and poultry and sea products because of the fear of COVID outbreaks that happened in those facilities in their originating countries. And then, as we saw last week, almost the same day we filed this lawsuit, there was a finding in China of the coronavirus on a package of imported food from another country. So what they know is that in China, at least, they know that it really is something that's happening. And it might be that they're more in tune to this because this is the country in which coronavirus started first, or they own Smithfield here in the United States, so they may have some insight into the inner workings of what's really happening in the factories, and I'm sorry, I keep calling them factories, but facilities that the USDA doesn't want us to know. And that was the point we made in the petition, that the agency is turning this intentional blind eye, and in that way, not disclosing to Americans what we all need to know.
So I want to bring our panel in. Dr. Silas Rao of Climate Healers, you're a systems analyst, you're an engineer. There have been these sort of almost ad hominem reports coming out. There was a report that a shrimp that left Latin America and went to China, there was COVID found in the container, and that raised alarms. But of course, who knows? We're not there testing the container ourselves. And what do you make of all this as you listen to it? And of course, you are a prominent vegan who would like to see the end of animal agriculture.
Yeah, what I see is the U.S. government and the USDA not doing their job, because they're really not addressing the fundamental problems. Like, we really shouldn't be having these facilities open in the first place, because they are not only are they transmitting COVID-19 to each other, to the workers, but they are getting on all these refrigerated packages, and we know that COVID-19 lasts a long time when you refrigerate, at these cold temperatures. So this is a USDA that seems to be in league with the industry and not concerned about the health of Americans.
Free from Harm's Robert Grillo, what would you like to say about, I can't even think of a more important issue. Our entire economy has been devastated. The numbers of people who have died, you can't even keep up with it. It grows exponentially every day, it seems. We're heading toward 200,000 Americans dead. And wouldn't this be the first thing that government's responsibility should include, is testing of food, where we know that COVID-19, one of the hot spots is slaughterhouses. We know that that's a place where there's so many slaughterhouse workers who have come down with the virus, where it's very difficult to maintain social distance because those workers have to essentially be shoulder to shoulder working on the kill floor. Wouldn't it make sense to just start doing some tests of the meat?
Yeah, it's interesting that you should mention that, Jane, because we just recently learned about testing in the city of Chicago at the slaughterhouses here. And what we discovered was rather shocking, I guess you could say, on one level, and not so shocking to us, but I think the public would be completely shocked to learn that the city does no testing. The Department of Public Health does absolutely no testing, even when someone reports that they got sick, that they believe they got sick from something that they bought or ate from one of these slaughterhouses. Now, the state has a kind of a voluntary testing setup where they just test for E. coli, and only when these places actually send in their samples. And of course, that system leaves it open for adulteration, right? They could sanitize their samples and send them in, and who knows if the testing labs would know. But as far as COVID-19 testing, who knows if we could get them to do that, because they aren't even testing for some of the most basic things, like salmonella and bird flu, and some of the things that we know run rampant in chicken farming today. So yeah, I mean, we have an exciting development, though, that the Department of Public Health is going to take a position on this finally, after months of coming to their public meeting, their virtual meeting now. They finally tell us they're gonna take this seriously, and they're gonna develop a position, and they may work with us to do what you're talking about, testing, and also just testing would be one of the many things that they would be cracking down on more. But we have laws here that should effectively shut them down, just from a public health standpoint, and the department isn't enforcing them.
I want to jump in and just show a chicken who was pulled out of a factory farm very recently because all the hens were supposed to be depopulated. And the farmer himself called a bunch of sanctuaries and said, come and get these animals, and actually helped carry the animals to the trucks. And talking to the veterinarian who treated the animals, you could see that she's missing feathers. She's looks like in very bad condition. We're talking about tens of thousands of them. She also told me that they had all sorts of ailments and intestinal problems and, worms and things of that nature. So these are not healthy animals to begin with when they're alive. And then they're slaughtered by people who may have COVID-19 because COVID-19 is rampant in the slaughterhouses. So I think it's problematical from beginning to end. And now you have the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine suing the United States Department of Agriculture for ignoring concerns about potential presence of SARS-CoV on meat and poultry products. So let me ask the attorney for PCRM, and I'm going to get him right back in the stream. There he is. How about doing testing yourself? Because if, in fact, there is COVID on some of these meat products, then that would be a huge story. And I'll use one other example. Many years ago, Consumer Reports tested ground beef, and they took a lot of it, and they did a lot of tests. And it was a big story at the time. They found that virtually 100% of the ground beef that they tested had E. coli. It had the presence, let me correct that. It had the presence of fecal matter. There was bleep, starts with S, in all of it. That was a Consumer Reports story. So maybe a Consumer Reports or an agency that is a non-governmental agency that or PCRM could actually do what the government refuses to do and test the meat.
That's right. And I think, Jane, you and I spoke at some point a few years ago, I believe when we had done something similar with fecal contamination in chicken. And we filed a lawsuit about that too, because the amount of times it shows up in the food is, it's unbelievable. And it's in part because you have 175 birds flying by per second. And then you have these conditions in which all the implements touch one carcass and then another and another and another. And inspectors who are there in smaller and smaller numbers as the years go by, don't really have time to see anything. Now, there are other systems in play for finding other contaminants and certain types of other viruses and things. And yeah, we are looking into the possibility of testing this as well. And we've done it in the past for a different a carcinogen that is in certain products as well. So we're very familiar with the testing process. We know that if USDA had been interested at all, it wouldn't have taken really more than a few $1,000s and a handful of samples to do just a pilot test. And I mean, I say handful, but I might mean 100 or 1,000, but it's something that a facility could easily do, or an agency in charge of inspecting our food supply could easily do. And so we're looking into that as well.
So Dr. Silas Rao, it was very interesting because almost immediately after PCRM filed their lawsuit, I was reading the paper the next morning, online, of course, and here's a story on Yahoo News. Amid new fears around COVID-19 food transmission, experts say there is, quote, no compelling evidence. New fears are being raised around food safety and COVID-19 after Chinese officials say they imported chicken from Brazil that tested positive for coronavirus. You mentioned this, Mark. And they basically go on to just basically say nothing to see here. And the Brazilian Association of Animal Protein said there is no scientific evidence that meat transmits the virus. The Brazilian Association of Animal Protein also noted it is not yet clear when the packaging was contaminated and whether it occurred during the export transportation process. So it was very interesting how they were very quick to respond with a contrary story, which is what we see in the media all the time. You'll do a story about heart disease being linked to eating animals, and very quickly you'll see a report come out very prominently that will in some way, shape, or form try to counteract that in the public's mind. Dr. Rao.
Yeah, this is how storytelling happens, right? So we live in a system of oppositional truths. People say one thing and another set of people have the exact opposite view. And it's up to us to figure out who's really telling the truth. And that's the kind of system we have. And this is why we are stuck in this situation where it's hard for us to get to the truth of what is really going on. And even those who are supposed to be on our side are not telling us the truth.
Well, you bring up a very interesting point. Speaking of politics, here was another headline. You have at a rally in Iowa last week, Vice President Mike Pence warned farmers and ranchers of a coming war on red meat. Senator Kamala Harris said she would change the dietary guidelines in this country to reduce the amount of red meat Americans can eat. We're not going to let Joe Biden and Kamala Harris cut America's meat. And it was compared to the war on coal. And then the Democrats came out and said, no, Kamala Harris said she loves cheeseburgers, but she urged the audience to ease up on meat intake, advocating for creative incentives that will encourage moderation in consumers' daily meat consumption and for educating them about the effect of our eating habits on the environment. Well, I have to say, Mark, that perhaps the best way to get people to stop eating animals is if we found out that indeed there was COVID on the packaging or on the meat itself.
Absolutely. And I think a court will look at this case and, the standard under the Administrative Procedure Act was the agency's action rational? And, there are times when you make a whole bunch of legal arguments about, the extent to which somebody thought about it or how much research they did or whatever. But this is just you can look at the denial letter we got from the USDA that just said, there's no evidence. We're not going to look for it. This is the end of this petition. And it's crazy. It's so strange to me that this is the agency that's in charge of the food supply and inspections, labeling for meat and poultry. And like you said, in other contexts, dietary guidelines and what the nation is supposed to be eating to be healthy. There's so many conflicts of interest across the board. And so we use our advocacy like this, these lawsuits and petitions to bring that out. And of course, we're working right now on the dietary guidelines as well, because at this point, we always hope the agencies come down and look at the science. What do the facts show? And fortunately, we're not seeing that the way we would like to.
Well, I mean, I think we all know now it's that there's corruption and moral bankruptcy, and that a lot of these agencies are destroyed from within. Look at the Postal Service right now being destroyed from within, where somebody who is actually a competitor to the postal system was put in charge of the postal system and has proceeded to literally try to destroy it from within, removing giant processors so they can't process mail and physically removing mailboxes so that people can't make mail, all to try to skew the election in favor of the current administration in the upcoming election. So the same thing is true of other institutions of government where they're really not operating in the manner that they were designed to operate. They're really fulfilling a mission of a completely different entity. In this case, I think corporations. What I find fascinating, Robert Grillo of Free From Harm, and you're in Chicago, I believe, which is like the center of the meat industry to a large degree, at least processing, is that two of these companies aren't even American companies. Smithfield is owned by the Chinese and JBS is owned by Brazilian companies. And not only are the folks at the USDA not testing to protect American consumers, but aren't they giving a pass in a lot of ways to these companies and helping them by, for example, pushing high-speed slaughter that workers' rights advocates have said, please stop the high-speed slaughter, not just because it's horrifically cruel, even crueler than regular slaughter, but that it makes it even harder for the workers to social distance and keep any kind of safety going when you're killing at such a high rate of speed. So what are your thoughts on all of that, Robert?
Well, we started the Slaughter-Free Cities campaign here in Chicago for the very reason that you're talking about, because Chicago is a hub for, the food giants like Kraft Foods and McDonald's and ConAgra, and Tyson has headquarters here, not their main headquarters, but one of them. So, we have that legacy, and then food advertising is a big industry here. But then there's the whole legacy of the slaughterhouse industry and being the slaughter capital of the world over 100 years, starting over 100 years ago. So the symbolic importance for us to make slaughter end here is huge. And, we will be also pursuing a ban on slaughter, new slaughterhouses. And we have chapters in different cities now that are pursuing the same goals. So, yeah, I mean, these giant multinationals that you're talking about, though, I think, we just don't know what's going on. There's no accountability. And now we have a system where, like you explained, we rely on self-regulation of an industry that lies, and that spreads a lot of misinformation and propaganda about what they do, and has the public believing it. It's hook, line, and sinker. So, that's a pretty scary situation in my mind, that these big companies really aren't, they're self-regulated, and they're not to be trusted to begin with.
Let me ask Mark again, and you've raised some really good points, is what's happening with the Postal Service right now is that Nancy Pelosi has called members of Congress back saying we were going to have hearings on this. Would it be possible to, given that Cory Booker, Elizabeth Warren, now it seems to a certain degree, Kamala Harris and others are looking at the problems with the meat industry, at least they're starting to, if you were to do tests and determine that you did find in whatever, 1,000 samples, however you do the test, one that has COVID, would that be enough, given the alarming health problem that would pose, to ask for a congressional investigation? Mark?
I think that's a great idea. I would hope so. At the same time, I'm a little skeptical because we see the way things are going everywhere else. There's a country like New Zealand where they go 100 days without an incident, and then when they have one, everybody sort of jumps into gear to make public health important, and we just don't really see that happening here. And obviously, we all remember the executive order from earlier this year in which the president made it clear that he wants these meat facilities to stay open, and then you had all the agencies, USDA, CDC, OSHA, jumping up and saying, that's right, and we're going to find a way to make it work. And that hasn't really been the case. What CDC and OSHA did was together they came up with these guidelines that in their text acknowledge the things you said, Jane, that workers are shoulder to shoulder for shifts that are 10 to 12 hours long, and they're physically exerting themselves, and the air is stale and cold, which is exactly the environment that preserves the coronavirus even longer. And there's even a study in Germany that showed a slaughterhouse there, due to these conditions of stale and cold air, the coronavirus droplets go 26 feet or so. So you have these conditions in which it's clear that the workers are spreading it not only amongst themselves, but whatever is in their vicinity. And then they land on these surfaces. And you think about it, the meat, the carcass is speeding by at these incredible speeds on conveyor belts or whatever. Those are surfaces themselves. And then it's going to the cutting implements, and then it's all getting mixed up. So I would have thought that our government would find these things fairly clear, but instead what they did was they said in their guidance that this is all you need to do, just be really careful. But if you can't be careful, at least you tried, and we'll remember that if there's ever an employment claim filed against you in the Department of Labor. I mean, it's It's astounding.
Now, you had made a reference to New Zealand. So again, from the Yahoo News article, this isn't the only time the linking of coronavirus and food safety has come up lately. Health officials in New Zealand said they're investigating claims that a recent COVID outbreak in the country which had been free of the virus for more than 100 days, was linked to frozen food. One of the people infected works at the Americold food cold storage facility in Auckland, New Zealand. So to your point, I think several have made it now. We do know, this is a quote, we do know from studies overseas that actually the virus can survive in some refrigerated environments for quite some time, according to New Zealand's Director General of Health. So, Dr. Rao, I want to ask you, I think one of the reasons why we're in such chaos in this country over COVID is that a lot of people are not wearing masks. They're not wearing masks in my neighborhood. I would say a good 65, 70% of people are not wearing masks, or they're wearing them here, not wearing them. And part of it, I think, is that when it first started, you remember that the powers that be said, you don't have to wear masks. Don't wear masks. It doesn't help you. I'm sure you all remember that, right? Then they did a 180 and they said, wear masks. And now they're like, wear masks. It's the key. Remember how they started out saying, wash all your food. We were all like terrified of even touching food. You know, I washed everything. I never washed food as much as I'd washed it. Then now they seem to be saying, don't worry about the food. The food's okay. So that, I think, basically gives people permission to say, well, if you're going to change the rules all the time, I'm going to make up my own rules. And it, I think, offers false assurance to people about the safety of food. Dr. Rao.
Yeah, I think fundamentally we are losing trust in our officials, in our institutions, and that's a huge problem in a pandemic. Because if you don't have trust in what our officials are telling us, then who do you look to, right? So each one of us has to construct our own truth. We're all going to come up with different conclusions. And that's the situation we find ourselves in because of all the mismanagement that has happened, especially in this country.
You're absolutely right. So, Mark, maybe as we get to the end of this discussion, you could elaborate on that, because it seems like we've heard so many different messages. At first, no masks, now masks. And at first, be careful about your food, wash your food, they're selling these ultraviolet things. I'm maybe embarrassed to admit that I bought one that you put on your counter at night. It's an ultraviolet light that supposedly kills COVID-19. Who knows how it works? But the point is that we were told initially, be careful with your food. Make sure you wash it all. And I'm still doing that. So whereas the officials say, be careful with your food, wash your food, whereas the workers putting the meat together have gotten COVID-19 in huge numbers. It's one of the main vectors, along with hospitals, along with nursing homes and prisons. Wherefore, wouldn't it be obvious that it's a concern that the meat products, those patties, might have COVID on them?
Absolutely. The lawsuit was just filed, and we're going to push it as long as we can. And lawsuits tend to be drawn out, but who knows? Maybe it'll carry into a better administration. It's we always think at the Physicians Committee that the science will show the way. And so, as you know, Jane, we conduct our own clinical research, and we do these kinds of pilot tests on products, and then we publish our results. And yeah, a lot of people do take them seriously. Others don't, for whatever reason. So we'll keep pushing and educating the public. At least to lay off the meat one way or another. It's going to kill you.
Exactly. And I think that given that there's no conclusive evidence that it's not, I mean, it's one thing to say there's no compelling evidence that it is, especially when you've refused to test. It's quite a different thing to say there's compelling evidence that it's not on that particular product. So my final question to you is, if you decided to do some tests, could you do that with alacrity, or how long would it take to even do that kind of testing?
It takes a while, and we're like I said, we've been looking into it, and we have a couple things underway, and we will, as soon as we get results, our approach is usually try to publish them in a peer-reviewed journal. That takes a little longer too, because you need to wait for everybody to review your article and they meet scientific standards, and then also to get a journal to pick it up. And so that unfortunately delays some of the news even longer, but that is something we're looking into.
Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time. Mark Kennedy, lead attorney for Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. I really appreciate you taking the time to update us on this really extraordinary lawsuit, because it's an unanswered question. It's not, nothing to see here. We've shown conclusively, the U.S. government, after testing 100,000 items of ground beef, that there's no COVID on it. We're not going to test it, and we're going to tell you nothing to see here. Those are two wildly different things. And given that they do test for E. coli, and every day or so there's a meat recall, which is so tragic, really, all these animals being killed for nothing, of many, many, many millions of pounds, they obviously have the capacity to test if they wanted to test. I mean, I guess that's my final question. I know I say final question, but this is such a fascinating subject, Mark. If the USDA decided, okay, the pressure's on, just like the Postal Service is now going to hopefully have to put back some of those mailboxes and sorting machines that they took out. If they felt there was enough pressure and they had to do this test, how soon could they test to determine, just like they determine whether there's E. coli, whether or not there's COVID on the meat?
That's really an interesting question, because the USDA does have a very comprehensive inspection and hazard checking system in place that it's developed over the years. And there is a way on the easy side of things to just say, okay, now start checking for this thing that we have defined as an adulterant starting today. And so the responsibility isn't even on the agency so much to do the work. It would be then on these facilities that have all this, money and machinery at their disposal to just add it to the list of things they check for. And it would be on them to do it within a certain time frame and then begin reporting the results. So USDA's job would actually be very easy. I was saying earlier they could have done a pilot study. That's the kind of thing the agency would do if it was, on the fence about an issue. It would check for itself. It has different kinds of something called the Agricultural Research Service, and then another research service within the agency to do this kind of work and figure out if it's something that should be a priority for the agency. And in this case, they just said, no, thanks. We're not going to do it. We're not going to ask anyone else to do it. It's crazy.
All right. Well, very informative. We're going to get final thoughts from our panelists. We're so honored to have Dr. Sailesh Rao. Dr. Rao, your final thoughts.
Well, thank you so much for hosting this and making this, bringing this to the public. I'm really appreciative of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine and the amazing work that they do. So thank you, Mark.
All right. Well said. And Robert Grillo of Free From Harm.
Thank you so much, Jane. We're fighting slaughterhouse proposals and defeating some of them, like we did in Milwaukee, a 60 million slaughterhouse deal we killed, no pun intended. But we're also working on those that are already open for years and making the case that they're a public health threat and a nuisance.
I just want to thank all of you for taking the time, and PCRM, excellent work as always on the front lines, doing really taking the kinds of actions that the government should be taking. But I'm very happy that you're there on the front lines trying to hold everyone accountable to us taxpayers and to the truth.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yeah.
It's good seeing all of you.
Yeah. Please join us next week for our continuing Boycott Meat Roundtable. Bye.
Bye now.